All right, he's the man everyone's talking about, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Now, you might call him Governor Turnaround because it wasn't so many years ago that Democrats were bragging that they were on the verge of turning the Sunshine State blue. But now, after 4 years of DeSantis and his policies, it's a reliable Republican stronghold. He won re-election by 20 points. And with his success comes a lot of presidential buzz. Joining me now is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, author of the brand new book, I'm holding it in my hand, The Courage to Be Free, Florida's Blueprint for America's Revival. Gov, you've been doing the rounds, man. Are you tired yet? It's good to see you. It's good to see you.
People are buying it, Laura, so, yeah. I really appreciate everybody chipping in.
Well, we know that the buzz about you is because of your success in Florida. And that's what everyone says, and that's what people want to replicate on the national scale. But there's criticism of your book that there's a lot of policy, but there's not enough you. And there's a lot of success in Florida, but they want to hear more about you. You on China, you on trade, you on, these substantive issues of foreign policy. What of that?
Well, Laura, I actually do address some of that. Of course, I'm a governor, so the issues that I'm dealing with over the last 4 years were things like COVID, education, the economy, and all the core things governors deal with. But what we have done in Florida is take on the CCP. So we've eliminated things like Confucius Institutes from universities, and we're getting ready to enact into law a ban on CCP-linked businesses purchasing land in Florida. We've worked with the Taiwanese here in Florida to be able to advance that. So we've been able to do stuff to make an impact on the state level. But look, at the end of the day, what I was trying to do was identify kind of how we led, because I think there are certain principles of leadership that allowed us to accomplish so much stuff, but then also just show people it can be done. Nobody faced more resistance and attacks from the left and the media of any 50 state governors than me over the last 4 years. Not only were we able to overcome that, but we were actually able to win a historic landslide re-election.
Now, Biden spoke at the House Democratic Caucus tonight, their issues conference, and he made a comment about passing left-wing pet issues with help from the Republican Party.
The MAGA Republicans are not going to get on board for most of these things, but that leaves a lot of Republicans that are still left. No. By the way, watch. I predict, watch what happens. Republicans can help make a significant majority in some of these things.
Yeah, because $7 trillion in spending is not enough, apparently. Now, alarmingly, Governor, most Republican senators and leadership seem to be a lot closer to Liz Cheney than to perhaps you and former President Trump on the issues. So do you consider that a problem and a disconnect between the electorate and the leadership?
Well, it's a disconnect from the base of the Republican Party and the conservative grassroots, but I think it's a disconnect with the majority of the public. The fact of the matter is Biden's policies have failed. A clear majority of people believe they failed. A clear majority of people believe the country's on the wrong track. So I think the proper posture is to fight back against Biden and then offer an alternative vision that vast majority of the public may want to sign up for.
So Illinois and Michigan, Governor Pritzker, Governor Whitmer, they're oftentimes mentioned as possible future presidential candidates if Biden doesn't run or something like that. Now, to a lot of us, the fact that they were reelected, we get why you were reelected, but they were reelected by healthy margins. So what are the people of Michigan and Illinois missing that your voters seem to get in the analysis?
Well, Laura, some of these races, you have the governor of Illinois, he had unlimited resources, our candidate didn't. So I think there's some other factors there. All I can tell you is you don't have very many people moving from Florida to Illinois and to Michigan. But I run into people every day who've moved to Florida from Illinois and from Michigan. And the way we govern the state and the principles that we uphold is a big reason why. I know Illinois has hemorrhaged more people than just about any state other than California and New York over the last 3 or 4 years. And there's a reason for that. They're not keeping the streets safe. They're taxing people too much. They're trying to put indoctrination in the schools. In Florida, we stand on the opposite side of all those issues. And the good thing about a federalist system with 50 states, people can vote with their feet, and they voted for the free state of Florida.
And Governor, I know you and some other notable Republicans are speaking at a Club for Growth conference this weekend. And apparently that appearance is being used by some, including President Trump, against you. And he basically says failed former Congressman David McIntosh and his globalist friends at Club for No Growth, who fought me all the way in 2016 and lost and then fought me again in 2020, are now threatening to spend money against me early because their new, he calls you boy Ron DeSantis. Governor, I know you're not going to talk about whether you're going to run for president, but the Club for Growth is known to be very pro-China trade, very liberal on issues like immigration, those key issues which are bread and butter for the America First, more populist conservatives. Would you be someone who would be co-opted, because they worry, from the establishment forces?
Well, in Florida, I came in and one of the first things I did, I got a ban on sanctuary cities through the legislature. Of course, I've transported illegal aliens to Martha's Vineyard. We're now working on mandatory E-Verify in the state of Florida. And also, when I was in Congress, we opposed the Gang of Eight amnesty back in 2013, which would have been a disaster. So, no, I think my record is very, very clear. And we are going to be strong on immigration, and we're going to be very strong against China. And it's not just because that's what the base wants. Those are the proper policies, given what we're facing in this country, an open border and China that gets away with murder across our economic relationship. They're flying a balloon to spy on Americans over the continental United States. We need to be smarter. We need to be stronger.
Governor, that means you're not for the Trans-Pacific Partnership. Going back to that old horse, are you?
No. I think that what we need to do is we need to disaggregate the economic relationship with China. We need to recapture supply chains here in the United States. I think there could be some economic benefits for people here at home, but I think just as importantly, this is a security issue. They are in control of key things that our economy depends on, and this has been something that's happened over a quarter century, I think starting with them going into the WTO, but the reality is there's an imbalance in the relationship that's not good for U.S. interests.
Governor, your book is destined to be #1. I think it's the fastest selling book, I understand, of a sitting political figure, and it's a huge hit. We wish you all the luck on the book tour, and go teach those Club for Growth people something. We appreciate you. Thank you.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.